Okay, welcome. Day 784 of the Trump presidency started, I think, in three news centers, big news centers. It started on the Indian-Pakistan border. Two nuclear powers having a tit-for-tat with their use of military power. It started in Hanoi, where it looked like a deal was going to happen, and then no deal happened. And this is and the president's held a news conference, and the minister, the foreign minister of North Korea has now held a news conference. We are indeed in living history with lots of consequences. We'll cover the topics we normally cover in terms of what's happening, what's happened the last fortnight, what's the president doing, what's affecting the presidency, what are policies we should at least take a look at. Then we'll go to the oil opposition, and we'll look at, end with another look on the presidential campaigns that are certainly happening now, starting now. Okay, the big news. Well, the president started the day this morning in Vietnam, thought he had a real chance of having three big victories in international affairs. They wouldn't all happen this week, but he could run the table on three big ones. Three big ones that might be enough just to run a whole election on, let alone having a good week, a good month, a good year. So let's go over them. Moving North Korea closer to a status in which it's no longer an imminent belligerent to the United States and to other countries. Because as many of you know, certainly it's in the paper, and some of you know very painfully perhaps, that the Korean War never ended. It just reached an armistice among the UN powers, and there is not even an armistice between North and South Korea. So moving to away from war would have at least a symbolic importance. And obviously, starting a roadmap to the denuclearization of that peninsula, denuclearization anywhere in the world is generally a good idea. So the president had an opportunity, and still does, to have a major victory there. It seemed like the U.S. and China are moving very closely to a trade deal. A trade deal between the executives, not between the governments. Meaning that the president's trade representative said the other day, they do not intend to submit it to Congress for approval. It will just be an executive agreement between powers. But moving China to reduce its unfair trade practices would be a big victory. And thirdly, the president seems to be, and the United States seems to be on the side of the angels in terms of Venezuela, a country that is so troubled that I think the latest term I heard, I don't do it kilograms or metric this time, the average Venezuelan in the last 2 years has lost 20 pounds because of the absence of availability of food and the super high hyperinflation. Plus, it continues to look like a good time for the president internationally with the end of the ISIS physical caliphate, in which the last remaining territory, the ISIS fighters allowed people to, who were not affiliated with them, presumably, to leave and And either they were going to have the final fight, or they would try to surrender maybe to a third party. So it looked like it was going to be a good time. So let's go through some of these things. They couldn't look happier yesterday. If there's a man crush, those two guys, they've gone from talking about Trump being a senile old man and Kim being Rocket Man to, you know, a real bromance. But then, a few hours ago, this headline came out. Trump Kim end summit early with no pact. I'm not afraid to walk away from a deal, Trump says. Let me see if I have a clip on that will actually run.
We thought, and I thought, and Secretary Pompeo felt that it wasn't a good thing to be signing anything. I'm going to let Mike speak about it. But we literally just left. We spent pretty much all day with Kim Jong-un, who is, he's quite a guy and quite a character, and I think our relationship is very strong. But at this time, we had some options, and at this time we decided not to do any of the options, and we'll see where that goes. But it was a very interesting 2 days, and I think actually it was a very productive 2 days, but sometimes you have to walk. I could have signed an agreement today, and then you people would have said, oh, what a terrible deal, what a terrible thing he did. No, you have to be prepared to walk. And, you know, there was a potential we could have signed something today. I could have 100% signed something today. We actually had papers ready to be signed, but it just wasn't appropriate. I want to do it right. I'd much rather do it right than do it fast.
Was the North Korean demand for lifting of some sanctions the real sticking point here, in that you did not want to do that and they did? And
it was about the sanctions.
Will there be a third summit, Mr. President?
Basically, they wanted the sanctions lifted in their entirety, and we couldn't do that. They were willing to denuke a large portion of the areas that we wanted, but we couldn't give up all of the sanctions for that. So we continue to work, and we'll see, but we had to walk away from that particular suggestion. We had to walk away from that. I want to keep the relationship, and we will keep the relationship. We'll see what happens over the next period of time. But as you know, we got our hostages back. There's no more testing. And one of the things, importantly, that Chairman Kim promised me last night is, regardless, he's not going to do testing of rockets and nuclear. Not going to do testing. So, you know, I trust him, and I take him at his word. I hope that's true.
Did you commit with Chairman Kim to a next summit during your term?
No.
Okay.
We'll see if it happens. It happens. I have not committed.
So, not an ebullient president, for sure. Now, a few minutes ago, the North Korean foreign minister had a news conference, and among the things he said, let's see if I have that. Oops, it didn't upload. Yeah. He basically said this. He said that, one, he disputed the basic facts the president presented. One was, it wasn't all the sanctions they were asking for to have lifted, only some of the sanctions. And two, it was only one of their nuclear facilities. So it was what he thought was proportionate. And they won't do a deal that isn't structured with these types of incremental progress on the sanctions. Now, whether or not that will be the reality, we'll find out. We know the North Koreans aren't known for their word, but that's what they said today. Then the president also later on had this strange comment regarding a person that he had vilified the whole North Korean regime on, brought the parents to his first State of the Union about how the government of North Korea was such a terrible group of people. And let's see if this starts.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. You have a personal relationship, and I believe Vice President Pence does, with the family of Otto Warmbier. I'm wondering, you've talked about this week about Kim Jong-un being my friend. You called him on Twitter. You said you have a great relationship. Have you in Singapore or here confronted Kim Jong-un about Otto Warmbier's death?
I have.
Asked him to take responsibility. And what did he say to you? And why do you call him your friend?
I have, and I have talked about it, and I really don't think it was in his interest at all. I know the Warmbier family very well. I think they're an incredible family. What happened is horrible. I really believe something very bad happened to him, and I don't think that the top leadership knew about it. And when they had to send him home, by the way, I got the prisoners back, I got the hostages back, and Otto was one of the hostages, but Otto came back in shape that was not even to be talked about. I thought it was horrible. Now, the others came back extremely healthy, but Otto came back in a condition that was just terrible. And I did speak about it, and I don't believe that he would have allowed that to happen. It just wasn't to his advantage to allow that to happen. Those prisons are rough. They're rough places, and bad things happened. But I really don't believe that he was. I don't believe he knew about it.
Did he tell you that he did not? Did Kim Jong-un tell you?
He felt badly about it. I did speak to him. He felt very badly. He knew the case very well, but he knew it later. And you got a lot of people. A big country, a lot of people, and in those prisons and those camps, you have a lot of people, and some really bad things happened to Otto. Some really, really bad things.
Why are you?
But he tells me that he didn't know about it, and I will take him at his word.
Not his best answer. So the summit actually started very well. I mean, the parties got there. I mean, Kim came from a distance. They both came from distance. He took the train. He took an armored train because he doesn't believe in the safety of airplanes if you're someone that someone might want to shoot down. So he took the long train until he got to Vietnam, in which he then got out, because Vietnam's train gauge is different than the Chinese, because the Vietnamese were always afraid of a Chinese invasion, so they made the tracks purposely different in width. So he had to get out, get into a caravan, and came. But he actually arrived with a game plan that he implemented. Now, going into the conference, it was noted that since the first summit, very little actually happened. Very little progress happened, and citing of statements that have little other than aspirational interest probably would not be enough for this summit. The president predicted it would be very successful and a number of times going into the conference. Matter of fact, he talked about that he was going to be nominated probably for the Nobel Peace Prize. And that came from and probably by the Japanese Prime Minister, who may have actually done that. I guess the nominations can be done anonymously. If it comes in the Japanese language, that's a key. And if it comes from the Japanese White House, that would be the key. Abe, of course, is probably, in Japan, it's the next trade pact that the president wants to negotiate. And I think the prime minister there in Japan knows how to flatter the president. What better way? You can nominate someone for almost anything. And if indeed a pathway to a less dangerous world is the result of what would happen in these summits, you have to understand that that may very well be a good reason for a Nobel Peace Prize. The President pointed out, and his advisor pointed out, that Vietnam is a good example to North Korea. What could happen when the U.S. and a country, another Asian country, a country becomes friends and economic allies of each other. Some thought that was ironic, for sure, that it's still, a totalitarian regime. It has the types of businesses that can enter into foreign commerce, and what type of businesses can even be in private enterprise is strictly controlled by the government. And a lot of the Vietnamese progress apparently has been moving people from an agricultural economy through the use of productivity tools in agriculture to more of a manufacturing economy, though at a lower level of intensity than we are usually used to. That is not necessarily the same pathway that North Korea might go, because North Korea already has an industrial capacity in the use of quite advanced science. So whether or not the path could be there, and it would still be very hard unless South Korea subsidized tremendously North Korea and other countries subsidized North Korea. They would need a major capital infusion. So the Wall Street Journal the other day talked in an editorial, said high nuclear stakes in Hanoi, anything can happen when Trump and Kim get together. And boy, they were right. South Korea, particularly on the left, the political left, were cheering for a deal. Cheering for a deal. But when there are missiles and large arrays of missiles aimed at you, thousands of missiles aimed at you that could be, don't have to become a ballistic missile, that can come and hit you within just a few minutes. You want a reconciliation. And Kim, before he came to the summit, purged in the last year a number of people in the party, in the military elite, that opposed doing a deal. So there was a lot of reason to believe that this could happen. And some of the purges, you never hear from the people again, of course, in North Korea. As you know, they have very tough prisons there. Not like these mamby-pamby American prisons. So that's the North Korean. So the win there is it's now going into extra innings. Secretary of State Pompeo says his team will start tomorrow on working on the next steps. It's not clear what are the next steps. Okay, China trade negotiations. These appear to be going very well. The President indicated the other day, and the U.S. Trade Representative indicated yesterday, that the President's threatened additional tariffs are being withdrawn, formally withdrawn from the process necessary that he could implement. Of course, they could always bring them back, but in testimony before Congress yesterday, the U.S. Trade Representative said real progress is being made, and while it's too early to predict the outcome, it's moving pretty well. And also he indicated that they have a deal on enforcement, or at least a framework for enforcement of whatever trade concessions the Chinese make. So this could happen. And the president has indicated he wants to have a signing ceremony down at his Mar-a-Lago facility in Florida. So we'll see. One of the things regarding how that trade agreement will be viewed is how Democrats will look at it. Because remember, Democrats, for the most part, were the original opponents of opening up China to be more in line with the rest of the world through the World Trade Organization. Yes, there was Clinton and there was Bush, but congressional Democrats, labor union Democrats have been critical. And Trump has already indicated, the president has already indicated that, Chuck Schumer won't like the deal, because he'll say it's not strong enough. They'll criticize my deal without even looking at the deal. So we'll see. Thirdly, Venezuela. The president has made several speeches, particularly in South Florida, about doing a regime change in Venezuela. There's a lot of reasons to believe that the government in power now is illegitimate. And not the least of which is that the parliament has declared it that way and has used the Venezuelan constitution to designate a new leader until elections can be held. This is from The Economist magazine, that many in Venezuela are welcoming the United States to come in and use military force and then probably get the heck out. Some may remember Iraq. It's hard to get in and then get out if the government is in chaos. If you completely purge the military. We have increased sanctions on the Venezuelan government and on individuals within the Venezuelan government. We have seized their money. We have indicated the money is available to the opposition. Going through the court proceedings to formally do that. The President Maduro is using his military against his people to prevent them from getting aid in terms of food and pharmaceuticals. He's severed diplomatic relations with several adjacent countries. He is becoming an outcast among the states that make up the Organization of American States. Still, he's in power. He remains in power, though he seems to be teetering. No major power yet has committed to back him up, like Russia backed up Assad in Syria. While Russia and China still support the government, they have sent signals publicly and privately, apparently, saying that they won't send their own military there to get involved. So how long Maduro will stay on? Of course, if you're in the military as a general, or if you're in the elite that have been favored by this government, you know if the government changes, you need to either get out fast or be given some type of golden path to get out to another country far away, or you're going to go to jail, maybe be shot. So it's the aid that was offered the other day on the border. You had 285 people injured. You had some killed. You had some military defect to the other side, or just get out of the country. The administration said we're weighing all options in Venezuela. Military option would be hard, would be one convenient if it was called for by the existing government, I mean the new government, and other nations in that area, in a limited role with other countries involved, such as the Bush coalition against Hussein in Kuwait. But whether or not this administration has that delicate touch on diplomacy, we'll see. But this is good politics for the president. Good politics and good government can go hand in hand. Florida, the Cuban vote, is so very important. And the president can use this and did use this in the State of the Union to talk about failed socialism. This is an example. Venezuela is an example of failed socialism. And you can make that argument. Another argument, this is an example of failed authoritarian government, in which you grab things and you don't know how to deal with it. You don't know how to then, if you do X and Y happens, how you manage Y to get back to A again. But so far, it maybe has changed the makeup of Florida politics going into the next election. So the president, on two of the three, China and Venezuela, may be close to at least an arguable victory. Okay, let's move on. What else happened in the world? What else happened in America? Anything else happened in America? Oh yes, not in America, but this little problem between the Pakistanis and the Indians. Remember, they both have nuclear weapons. Remember how the Pakistanis got theirs? In part because of the Saudis provided funding to help them get nuclear weapons. It's the Islamic bomb. India has their nuclear weapons. India is a bigger country, a larger military. So from Pakistani's point of view, just as North Korea looks at vis-a-vis America, that you need nuclear weapons. Well, Pakistan has had a long-standing disinclination, reluctance to deal with the jihadi forces that are in their so-called tribal areas, where they're trained to do a terrorist act in other countries, whether it be Afghanistan, whether it be in Kashmir, whether it actually be in other parts of India. Their lack of action recently upon an attack, the lack of actions after the jihadi attack on an Indian military base, led the Indians to bomb some Pakistani territory where they claim the jihadis' bases are at. So far, the U.S. response has been, you guys should work it out. And if we can help, let us know. It is very challenging. Secondly, we got this morning the final, a preliminary number for how the economy grew last year. It grew 2.6% in the last quarter and 2.9% in the year. Now this is subject to revisions. Go through a couple of revisions over the next couple of months. The tax cut was aimed to stimulate a 3% growth in the economy. That was close, 2.9 versus 3. However, the economy may very well be slowing, particularly on the consumer side. We'll see in the future. Oh yes, we're in a national emergency. President declared a national emergency over the Congress's action or lack of action to fully fund the southern border wall to the specification that the administration would like. He declared it. A lot of legal challenges immediately occurred, including one led by California, one led by the ACLU, but 4 different challenges that are now in the federal court system. The House of Representatives voted on Tuesday to void it. 13 Republicans joined all Democrats to vote to void it. However, that must also be approved by the Senate. It's not clear that there's enough Senate Republicans that will cross and vote for it. A resolution of disapproval has been introduced today. The majority leader can bring it up at any time. The president talked about serious consequences to Republicans that vote for it. So I'm not optimistic. And even if it gets to the president, he can veto it and would take a 2/3 vote. However, the lawsuits in part basically say that either the emergency act he's acting under doesn't give him the authority, or that it's unconstitutional based upon the separation of powers between the executive and the congressional branch. Again, I go to the Wall Street Journal because I could do New York Times and Washington Post, and you would get a left or left-to center view. I like to go to the Wall Street Journal sometimes to do a center-right viewpoint. They have editorialized against it on many grounds, philosophical and practical political grounds, because sooner or later they figure Democrats will control the White House again. And if one president can use that, another president can use that. In fact, let's see if this runs. In the past, Republicans have been very critical of presidential overreach.
I'm going to be signing a national emergency, and it's been signed many times before. It's been signed by other presidents. From 1977 or so, it gave the presidents the power.
Has the president done something worthy of impeachment, and should he be impeached?
Well, he certainly did something that was unconstitutional, but it certainly depends on what happens. I mean, I think certainly he could be impeached, and certainly they could shut down the government.
The action he's proposed would ignore the law, would reject the voice of the voters, and would impose new unfairness on law-abiding immigrants, all without solving the problem.
Signing an executive order, giving a speech, barnstorming around the country, defending that executive order, is not leadership.
This is a tremendous presidential overreach. I will try to defund the effort for him to go it alone. We will challenge him in court. Now I will continue to work to repair a broken immigration system in a bipartisan fashion.
I am ashamed that I chose...
We'll get to you soon. Hold on. A number of, on a bipartisan basis, a number of national security officials in past administrations indicated they feel that there's no national emergency. That will be probably part of the political landscape and legal landscape going forward. The Wall Street Journal again, after the action, editorialized in part, Obama's abuses are no justification for Trump's emergency order. But some things have happened. One caravan did stop at the Texas border and turned around. I guess they heard about the emergency order and decided to turn back. 538, Nate Silver's group, analyzing public opinion, said, in many ways, surprisingly, there's not more public uproar on this. The president's supporters and a vast majority of Republicans support the president's action using national emergency authority. And without that, Republican senators and Republican members of the House are unlikely to go the other way on this issue from what the president wants them to do. Okay. Michael Cohen, yesterday. How many of you watched any part of that? Wow. How do you like the back and forth? Doesn't that drive you crazy once they start to go question? Here's your 5 minutes, you're going in one direction, and another 5 minutes, you're going in the other direction. Yeah. I think the LA Times thought it was pretty significant. This is their front page today. This is another description that was in, I think it was the Washington Post. Michael Cohen depicts a life more like The Sopranos than The Apprentice. He intimated the president was like a mob boss. Never tells you something direct that could be used against him, but you know what to do. And his example was, we're not involved in Russia. Right after he was talking to him about being involved in Russia, and to make sure what happened. So some of the highlights. Let's see. I may have a clip here. Do I have a clip from here? No. Some of the highlights. The hush money involving Stormy Daniels, the Trump world as a Faustian bargain in which he and others sacrificed integrity for intoxicating whiffs of power, the Trump Tower project in Moscow. That Trump Tower project was supposed to be the tallest building in Europe. He had no direct information about collusion with Russia, but said he had suspicions and indicated that the president would basically do anything to win. And he said the very quotable words, he's a racist, he's a con man, and he's a cheat, from his former lawyer. Let's look at some of the highlights.
I am ashamed that I chose to take part in concealing Mr. Trump's illicit acts rather than listening to my own conscience. I am ashamed because I know what Mr. Trump is. He is a racist, he is a con man, and he is a cheat. The questions have been raised about whether I know of direct evidence that Mr. Trump or his campaign colluded with Russia. I do not. And I want to be clear. But I have my suspicions. A lot of people have asked me about whether Mr. Trump knew about the release of the hacked documents, the Democratic National Committee emails, ahead of time. And the answer is yes. Mr. Trump knew of and directed the Trump-Moscow negotiations throughout the campaign and lied about it. He lied about it because he never expected to win. He also lied about it because he stood to make hundreds of millions of dollars on the Moscow real estate project. Mr. Trump is a racist. While we were once driving through a struggling neighborhood in Chicago, he commented that only black people could live that way. And he told me that black people would never vote for him because they were too stupid. Mr. Trump is a con man. He asked me to pay off an adult film star with whom he had an affair and to lie about it to his wife, which I did. And I am going to jail in part because of my decision to help Mr. Trump hide that payment from the American people before they voted a few days later.
Did the president call you to coordinate on public messaging about the payments to Ms. Clifford's in or around February 2018?
Yes.
What did the president ask or suggest that you say about the payments or reimbursements?
He was not knowledgeable of these reimbursements, and he wasn't knowledgeable of my actions.
He asked you to say that.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Cohen, how long did you work in the White House?
I never worked in the White House.
And that's the point, isn't it, Mr. Cohen?
No, sir.
Yes, it is.
No, it's not, sir.
You wanted to work in the White House.
No, sir.
You didn't get brought to the dance.
Mr. Trump asked you to threaten an individual or entity on his behalf.
Quite a few times.
50 times?
More.
100 times?
More.
200 times?
More.
500 times?
Probably. Over the 10 years.
Is there a book deal coming or anything like that?
I have no book deal right now in the process. I have been contacted by many, including for television, a movie. If you want to tell me who you would like to play you, I'm more than happy to write the name down.
Can you please describe for us, to the best of your recollection, you were present, exactly what Mr. Stone said to Mr. Trump?
It was a short conversation, and he said, Mr. Trump, I just want to let you know that I just got off the phone with Julian Assange, and in a couple of days, there's going to be a massive dump of emails that's going to severely hurt the Clinton campaign.
To your knowledge, did the president or his company ever inflate assets or revenues?
Yes.
And was that done with the president's knowledge or direction?
Everything was done with the knowledge and at the direction of Mr. Trump.
You're a pathological liar. You don't know truth from falsehood.
Sir,
It's
I'm
over
sorry.
now.
Are you
this
referring
is
to
my
me or the
time.
president?
Hey, this is my time.
Are you referring to me, sir, or the
When I
president?
ask you a question,
Yes.
I'll ask for an answer.
Sure.
Over and over again, we want to have trust. It's built on the premise that we're truthful, that we come forward. But there's no truth with you whatsoever. That's why that's important to you, to look up here and look at the old adage that our moms taught us. Liar, liar, pants on fire. No one should ever listen to you and give you credibility.
Putting up silly things like this,
Oh, that's silly.
really unbecoming of Congress. It's that sort of behavior that I'm responsible for. I'm responsible for your silliness because I did the same thing that you're doing now for 10 years. I protected Mr. Trump for 10 years.
Now, some reported or commentated on the fact they thought that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez actually modeled the type of questioning that should occur during a congressional hearing, in which you cite some a bit of information, ask for confirmation, and moved on. That certainly is not the image that that many thought she would bring to this hearing. That would be more strident. It seemed to be more straightforward. She asked one question at a time, avoiding long-winded speeches, and why she was asking the question and listened carefully to the answer, which gave her the basis for a follow-up inquiry. In just 5 minutes, she actually helped lay out the facts to substantiate charges. Okay, here's what Cohen is going to prison on. These charges: lying to Congress, tax evasion, bank fraud, and campaign finance violation. All or most of those based upon the Stormy Daniels payment and then telling Congress about it and violating federal election laws. Sentenced to 3 years in prison starting May 6th. He is cooperating with special counsel and the U.S. Attorney's Office, Manhattan, which he talked about an inquiry that may not be known up to that point. That was his second day on Capitol Hill. Today he ends with a third day in Capitol Hill. Two of those were classified hearings closed to the public before the Senate Intelligence Committee and today before the House Intelligence Committee. Wall Street Journal talked about Cohen in the Coliseum. But here's one thing from that editorial from this morning. The day, this is from the Wall Street Journal, the day was above all a reminder that Americans elected a president who had spent decades in the sleazier corners of New York business and tabloid life. He surrounded himself with political rogues like Mr. Stone, legal hustlers like Mr. Cohen, and even brought in a Beltway bandit from Central Casting, Paul Manafort, as his campaign chairman for a time. Republicans knew all this when they nominated Mr. Trump, and now he and the GOP will pay a political price as Democrats marinate in that blue past in hearing after hearing. Character does matter, especially in presidents. Not the best editorial from the conservative Wall Street Journal. But does it change public opinion? Probably not. Probably not at all. The Cook Political Report, which I consider very reliable and down the road and savvy on politics, said doesn't put the testimony outcome could have done two things: put pressure on Democrats to call for an impeachment investigation and move public opinion of the president. At the end of the day, my answer to both questions is no. So we'll see. Elsewhere in the world, the German chancellor, yes, she's in her final days as chancellor, talked about, going alone. That America is going alone, and Germany needs to make sure that they are taking care of themselves. Maybe going Germany first. How chilling is that? Her envoy slammed the wall and drew a Cold War comparison. While understanding the U.S. legitimate security interests, a wall doesn't resolve any domestic problems, said the German government's transatlantic coordinator. Indeed, Germany's history has, if anything else, shown that walls only do one thing: divide people from one another. Isolation in the long term doesn't lead to security. And as you can see in this chart, Germany's trade with China has gone way up. And certainly that is a pathway to for the European community to pursue. America, as one of the top 3 world economies, always going to be important to the other trading partners. But the other trading partners are also important. Oh yes, there was this the other day. One of the leading Russian TV commentators bragged about how the new hypersonic missiles that the Russians have developed, primarily for their submarine fleet, can reach all types of places within 5 minutes, including, for example, their examples, Camp David, the Pentagon, Fort Ritchie, Maryland. Anyone know why Fort Ritchie, Maryland? That's got to be important. I don't know. A naval communication base in Washington, McClellan Air Force Base up by Sacramento. Just shows it can hit almost anywhere in America. Oh yeah, and the president had indicated he was going to defund California's high-speed rail, even the reduced scope that the governor talked about, and wants the federal money back. Those things. And one more. This thing never ends. During this period, the president went to war again with the New York Times, and again called the Times the enemy of the people for doing what they did. The New York Daily News, not always friendly to the New York Times, supported the Times. Dear Mr. President, free press is essential to democracy. The news stand with the Times. Okay. Oh, yes. We also found out the president was a little overweight, slightly. Cholesterol level 196, up from 120, or he's LDL. LDL was under 120 before, now it's at 122. Some argue that the president is, because of his genes, he is what's known as the healthy obese. And there was once a German study that said it can be, so I felt very good. So why am I on my diet now? I'm just healthy, obese. But others kicked back and said, no. One study does not make that true, and being obese to any extent is a risk factor. So how unpopular is the president? Well, he still has 53% disapproval. How does that compare to when we got together last time? Well, last time he was 54% disapproval, so he's a little bit less disapproved over 2 weeks. We'll see what happens in another couple of weeks. Matter of fact, the president's job approval is over 50% in 17 states in America. Those that are the darker green are the states in which he is particularly have a high rating. Not obviously the ones in the lighter colors, such as California, are where his job approval is particularly low. No, I don't think there's any surprises in either of those. If you look at it, one of the states in which his job approval and disapproval are surprisingly not as high as you think, the approval is not as high as you think, is in the state of Texas. Some have looked at that number from the public opinion polls and say that if the Democrats could mobilize in Texas, there might be an actual opportunity to win there. If not in this cycle, at least in the next cycle. And those are the states in which, if you were a political manager, you look at these numbers and say, Texas is a possibility. Certainly Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan are all important. You got to make sure you take those. Okay, let's move on. What's the immediate agenda? Next 30 days. The Mueller report is destined to come out. If nothing more indicating that than Rod Rosenstein, the assistant deputy attorney general, is leaving, and in 2 weeks, mid-March, and he indicated he would stay on until the report would come in. The federal grand jury called by the special prosecutor hasn't met since January. There's some. Is the thing done? Is it cooked and about to go over to the Attorney General? We don't know, but probably by the time we next meet, we'll be talking about this. And there's plenty of questions to talk about. We'll talk about those issues in a couple of weeks. Now, the new Attorney General Attorney General Barr has indicated that he may or may not release the report. He will certainly send a synopsis of the report over to Congress. Now, Karl Rove, writing in today's Wall Street Journal, the former Bush political guru, makes the argument that a partial release, rather than a full release, is the right thing. You don't want any innocent parties to be implicated. And I would imagine that we'll hear more about that in the days ahead. Of course, others, such as Congressman Schiff from Glendale, says, if we don't get the full report, we're going to subpoena the people. Now, there's executive privilege and other issues that can block that, but there'll be certainly a confrontation between Congress and the administration on that issue. And it could just end in an anticlimax. They've done their indictments. They indicted a lot of people, and no smoking guns were found, just a lot of smoke. But the president is not through the legal problems. There's a large number of investigations, and at least one or two that came out yesterday, that indicates the president is going to be in litigation and under criminal suspicion, or his key allies will be under criminal suspicion for a long time to come. There's the Russian investigation, there's the Turkish lottery, there's the Ukrainian lottery, hush money payments, the Trump Organization and Foundation, the Trump inaugural, and just a wide-ranging series of investigations on the administration itself and the conduct of the business within the administration. So we'll see. One thing the president has made very clear is that he's tried to lay the groundwork with his political base to disregard it. He's attacked the investigation, according to, I think this is the New York Times, in statements 1,100 times. 1,100 times. And they charted it out. They charted out when it's been fairly constant, some months greater than others, that the president has gone on the attack. A free press is really amazing. It also is very difficult sometimes to get the government job done, because the free press is a restraining force to you. Okay. So we're getting close to a China deal. I think we'll probably have a signing sometime in March of whatever deal can be reached. It can be a deal that, we settled on 80% of the issues, and we made a deal on that, and we're going to keep working on the remaining 20% of the deal. I think the president wants a China win, and I think the Chinese know that they can structure a deal that is beneficial to them. And the president really needs one for our agricultural industry, such as the farmers of soybeans. Soybeans, sources of soybeans, one of the largest crop in American agriculture, I understand. China and other parts of the world started to buy just from other areas of the world, from Brazil and Argentina. There's other places that can grow soybeans. One of the issues that these negotiations are trying to deal with is it's very hard for Americans and other non-Chinese to get patents in China. Well, it's relatively less burdensome. Matter of fact, the U.S. I think has the highest number of patents, because we're a country that encourages people to patent their intellectual ideas and their inventions. So this will be one area that the trade agreement will do. And one of the areas I think sometimes we don't think about the importance of the Chinese is look who are the world travelers these days? By far, the world travelers are the Chinese in terms of billions of dollars in value. U.S. number 2, Germany number 3. Okay. And I think the next 30 days, Venezuela is going to come undone for the current government. The NAFTA ratification process has begun in the Congress, and apparently the demand that from the candidate, they won't even submit it for ratification unless the president drops the steel and aluminum tariffs that remain after the deal. Okay, his policies. Let me just talk about one. The administration announced curbs on federal funding for clinics providing abortion. New rule, according to this headline, forces separation of funding and facilities for programs that perform abortion or refer women to have them elsewhere. The rule is primarily targeted against Planned Parenthood that provides both in their facilities. So by saying that you can't do you can't get the federal money for family planning in your existing facility, it will make it very expensive for Planned Parenthood, and faith-based organizations will probably get a greater and greater share, perhaps most of the family planning money. Ironically, at the same time, there have been fewer live births. Now, some thought that was related to abortions, but other studies have indicated, no, American women are just having less babies, and significantly less babies. Move on. Let's talk about the opposition. Leading into the next presidential election. First of all, you have to remember that the president's been raising money for his re-election almost from day one. And has been the most vigorous president in memory in having a separate campaign organization, major fundraising going on, raising lots of money, but he also has spent a lot of money on digital media. That was so key, according to his aides, to his last victory, targeting people, searching them out and giving them specialized messages that appeal to them. Now, sometimes politicians will do a message that is less pro-them than anti their opposition. You know, to annoy you with the opposition. I'm sure there's a number of websites, Facebook and other social media, Instagram, in which the whole issue of reparations for slavery is now pointed out as the #1 goal of the Democratic Party, because some members have indicated they are willing to study it. But it's enough to get people aroused. And Democrats do the same thing. The worst of the president's stuff. So the campaign has begun on both sides. Of course, the goal is 270 electoral votes. Yesterday, the very respected University of Virginia Center for Politics came out with their first projection, forecast based upon where things stand now, and they're projecting forward. That would have Republicans with 248 of the needed 270, and Democrats behind with only 244, with 46 toss-up electoral votes. And those toss-up states include Arizona and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and New Hampshire. Democrats would either need to roll or run, win those, particularly Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, and pick up a lean Republican, and Republicans on the other side would need to do the same. Florida, that's why this whole thing of Venezuela and Florida is going to be very important to the next election. Of course, the ex-felons in Florida voting for the first time may have an effect, too, more towards Democrats. This is the Time Magazine cover, current issue. Not all these people want to run for his seat. The latest, Bernie Sanders. Sanders created the agenda which most Democrats are running on.
My turn.
An independent senator known for his Brooklyn accent.
Change never, ever takes place from the top on down.
Populist message.
The level of wealth inequality in America is grotesque.
An anti-establishment appeal.
Establishment Democrats don't generate excitement.
Bernie Sanders is jumping into the race for president again.
Hi, I'm Bernie Sanders. I'm running for president.
In the 2016 primaries, he pushed a democratic socialist message, and he found a big audience for it. He ultimately came up short.
I accept your nomination.
But many of his ideas have lived on.
In a modern, moral, and wealthy society, no American should be too poor to live.
In 2016, he was the only challenger to the Democratic establishment. But this time around, he'll be up against a crowded and diverse group of opponents. Some have adopted ideas he made popular in 2016.
Well, how do you feel about Medicare for all?
Medicare for all.
Medicare for all.
So what are the issues he made pillars of the progressive agenda? A $15 minimum wage, tuition-free public college, and Medicare for all.
Understand that health care is a right, not a privilege.
But Sanders' liberal credentials may have taken a hit over his perceived failure to address claims of sexism during his 2016 campaign. He has since apologized.
What they experienced was absolutely unacceptable.
So how has Sanders taken on President Trump? He's been one of his most outspoken critics.
The most dangerous president in modern American history. Most people who observe them would agree is a pathological liar.
Trump has returned the insult.
Crazy Bernie. You know, he's always like complaining, he's jumping around, the hair's going crazy. Lunatic.
So, what are his chances? He's near the top of the early polls. He's got some big advantages over his opponents, including a small donor fundraising list, a 50-state organization, and fervent supporters. He has major name recognition and knows how to electrify a crowd.
We are going to take on the drug companies, end their greed, and lower the cost of prescription drugs.
But he could be up against a base who are looking for a fresh face to take on Trump, even if it's on a platform that Bernie built.
So he's in. He changed his media consultant from the last campaign. That was announced yesterday, which was somewhat of a surprise. Get back here. Right there. Okay. So he's in. So let's look at the group that's in, or almost in so far, and let me just talk about some of them today. Amy Klobuchar continues to get a lot of blowback through articles regarding the way she treated and treats her Senate staff. She also got a statement from 50 or 60 former staffers that said no, she was more of a mentor than a tyrannical boss. Sanders announced, Biden says, don't be surprised if I run. Sooner or later, Joe Biden has to decide. Running for president, running for any office, but running for president is really a long, hard slog. You have to sooner or later get in and start making those trips that are necessary. The Republican governor of Maryland, he may be among the top 3 most popular governors in America. Hogan has indicated that, has been very critical of the president, but said he wouldn't run unless he had a chance to actually win the nomination. Governor of the state of Washington has indicated, Inslee? Is it? Inslee has indicated he may run on purely the environmental platform. He said we only have 10 years to save the planet, and we got to start now. Hogan of
The Republican Trump pretty weak in general election. We talked about how so many of the Democrats have taken on Bernie Sanders' views that it might dilute his strength, particularly in states like New Hampshire, and which will be a key state because it's right next to Massachusetts, it's right next to Vermont. That will be a key state to decide which of the most progressives are going to survive. Let me go beyond that. Let me go to something else. The Economist talks about the crowded field. Showed some of the implied probabilities of winning the Democratic nomination by candidates. It's the Economist out of United Kingdom. They had Harris, Biden, O'Rourke, and Sanders in their top 4 in probability. In terms of favorable versus unfavorable, and the net favorable, almost all the Democratic candidates have a net unfavorability among all voters, not among Democrats, but among all voters. So they need to pretty much establish why people should vote for them. And surprisingly, Howard Schultz, the coffee magnate, the Starbucks magnate, that was going to run in the middle and unite both sides, is the most unpopular one so far. That may be a sign of how American politics is so much is bipolar these days. Yeah, let's watch this. This is good.
As you enter a campaign, you must go in with confidence, and I have great confidence. Not cockiness, but confidence.
I am a candidate.
I am running.
I am officially running
for President of the United
States of America.
There's no turning back.
In most years, presidential announcements have had something in common. Not just the phrasing, but the weather. It's sunny. It's spring, summer, or fall. To be sure, there are some notable exceptions to this.
I'm here tonight to announce my intention to seek the Republican nomination.
This time around, a flurry of 2020 candidates
For President of the United States.
are kicking off their campaigns in the dead of winter.
Our fight is for big structural change.
Nearly 2 years before Election Day. It used to be that lesser-known candidates would enter early. To better understand why so many 2020 wannabes are in campaign mode already, let's take a look back.
If you go all the way back to Lincoln, he announced he was running 6 months before the election. You see that until recent decades, candidates typically entered the race less than a year before Election Day. That was primarily due to the fact that until reforms were enacted in the early 70s, presidential primaries were mostly beauty contests. Party bosses played a much larger role. The first U.S. president to hop in the race super early was a little-known Georgia governor who declared his candidacy 23 months before the general election. Jimmy Carter made his announcement several months after the Watergate scandal forced Richard Nixon to resign.
I have never been a quitter.
Carter went on to win. Reagan followed his example. Then Bush and Clinton got into the presidential race closer to the year before the election mark. The start date crept forward in 2000. George W. Bush and Al Gore both chose the month of June, 17 months before the election, to hold events announcing the kickoff of their campaigns.
And I'm glad others are talking about me.
By 2008, President Bush's popularity after the war in Iraq was in the tank. Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, seeing a favorable climate for Democrats, jumped into the race nearly 2 years before the election. Obama showed how the strategy could pay off, pounding the cold winter pavement in Iowa. The newcomer, a black man running in a white state no less, there managed to beat the most powerful machine in Democratic politics. Obama felt he had to show black voters in South Carolina that they shouldn't dismiss his chances, that white voters would back a black candidate. For the 2020 election, Democrats are entering a wide open field.
You've heard from a lot of people and you're going to hear from a lot more.
With no heir apparent. With President Trump's popularity well below 50%, it could be the Democrats are chomping at the bit to harness partisan anger and take back the White House.
The big question now is whether the two other marquee Democratic names, Beto O'Rourke and Joe Biden, decide the water's warm, time to dive in, even in the bitter cold of an Iowa and New Hampshire winter.
And in fact, O'Rourke said the other day that he's made up his mind and he'll announce it soon. Just kind of a funny line. I made up my mind, I will announce it soon. Social media is becoming increasingly important. If you look at the number of people who are in the, who follow them, you can see that's one way to judge the early, who's doing well. On that, Harris, Warren, and Sanders are particularly doing strongly, as also Beto O'Rourke. Small dollar donations, Sanders and O'Rourke were doing very well until Bernie Sanders announced, and Sanders rolled up $10 million in the first week. 40% of his donors were first-time donors. 40%. The average donation was 26%. $26. On the mic for a second. Okay. Let's see. I'm going to come back to that in the future. Okay, some end notes. Next Tuesday, the class I do with Rich, and is Phil here? Rich, we'll do our Constitution class next Tuesday. We have some tape excerpts from an interview I did with former Congressman and Law School Dean Tom Campbell, as well as a live presentation by a Cal State professor here. We return in 2 weeks, and my Money News returns on March 19th. Okay, how many of you understand or know about fantasy sports? Baseball, football, what have you. Nerds like me, we get around and we draft baseball teams, football teams, and then we compete for the whole season long. 538 a couple of weeks ago, .com did a fantasy draft in the Democratic primary. And I thought this was a good way to kind of talk more about the field, to hear from them. It will run until almost the end of the class, about 5 minutes.
We are back for the second round of the 538 2020 Democratic primary draft. And we have some new faces with us. Claire and Nate weren't with us for the first round. We also have some new faces on the table, such as Tulsi Gabbard. We have, Mark Cuban, Pete Buttigieg. So to explain the goal of what we're doing here is we want to pick who we think will win the Democratic primary in 2020.
This type of pure horse race analysis degrades our political culture, Galen.
Save it. First, we're going to start off by picking the order, and last time I had a handy Make America Great Again hat. This time I have a Make America Read Again hat. Nate, go ahead. Pick who's first.
Number one.
Don't look. I am going to make this relatively easy and choose Elizabeth Warren.
Ooh, bad pick. Bad pick.
Bad pick.
That is totally fair. She is not in the lead in terms of the polling, but a lot of people try to figure out who the Trump of the 2020 primary is, but I'm going to talk about who the Romney is of the 2020 primary, because Romney ultimately did win the nomination even if he didn't win the presidency. And I think in the same way that Romney was able to unite the party, Elizabeth Warren could do a similar thing, right?
It's actually an okay pick.
Yeah, progressive who's acceptable to party loyalists, to the party establishment. That's the best pick.
But they're better picks. And having the number 2 pick, I'm probably going to make the better pick. Let me see if I can
go ahead.
Find the right. I take Senator Kamala Harris.
Oh, bandwagon jumper.
So she appeals to different parts of the constituency, unlike Elizabeth Warren, who already had a big stumble on a race-adjacent issue with the DNA test. Kamala Harris is part Asian, part black. She's from California, which is obviously a really diverse state. California has its primary pretty early. It's a big advantage. We talked about this on the podcast this week. I don't think anybody here on this table is more than like a 20% chance to win, but I think she is, like, to me, a fairly clear number 1.
Nate, sometimes when you try to please everyone, you end up pleasing no one.
Okay, well,
That's a good argument against her. Yeah, I think you made a compelling case that she's stronger than Elizabeth Warren.
And she's doing a little bit better than some other people like Kirsten Gillibrand, but she's also she has to define herself, and we'll see what people think of her.
All right, Claire, your pick.
Well, you know what? I'm probably going to go with a name that starts with B, and there are a few names that start with B. I'm going to pick Beto O'Rourke.
I tried to hide him from you under here and put Biden in front of you.
O'Rourke has, he obviously lost his Senate campaign against Ted Cruz, but he did pretty well in a red state. And I'm really surprised by how much of a celebrity he's become. I just think there's something about O'Rourke where he could potentially have both the star power thing happening and also maybe some establishment forces backing up behind him.
I do feel like there's a question about, like, first of all, yeah, you can win the Pod Save America primary. How representative of that is that of the Democratic primary overall? I'm not sure. Because it is a little bit like, okay, out of all the people on this table, he is not the most qualified. Probably in the lower third of most qualified. 3-time congressman, nothing, it's not nothing, right? But, like, I'm a little bit less bullish on Beto than I had been a few weeks ago.
All right, Micah, your turn. Take it away.
Okay. I think all this analysis is basically pure speculation, informed speculation. A lot of speculation, I agree with it, but it's not based on anything that voters have said or done.
I agree.
In fact, the person leading the polls right now, Joe Biden, has not been picked. I'm not going to pick him either.
What? I thought that was a lead up to picking Joe Biden.
Instead, I'm going to pick who I picked last time, Amy Klobuchar.
Wait, that is like the least represented in the polling.
Here's why, Galen. She has a demonstrated record of outperforming what she should do at the ballot box.
But here's the thing, how is she going to differentiate herself from, say, Gillibrand, who is...
Midwest. Next.
Wait, Gillibrand is like trying to run as a Midwesterner too.
Yeah,
in Iowa, she's like, I'm from a rural district.
Gillibrand is trying to run as like a more uniting, kind of happy warrior candidate, which I think is kind of the vibe that Klobuchar would have.
So if you're saying that other candidates are trying to run as Amy Klobuchar, I think that's a good argument. You're right, that she's a very good candidate.
That's a wrap. That is the second round of the 538 Democratic Primary Draft 2020. We will see you back here next time for the third round.
Okay, that was done 30 days ago, and of course that was before Bernie Sanders came into it. I think what we have is a very fluid situation, and will be that fluid situation. I don't think even the first Democratic debate is not until, what, June? I think it's June. Because there's so many, it's going to do it over a couple of nights, and almost anyone in the top 20 is going to be able to come. They won't do the first tier and a second tier. They'll let trying to allow people to have that moment to differentiate themselves. So we've gone through a lot today. And I just want to, remind you that we are living history. What's happening in the world, what's happening in our country, is truly something to behold, either from a point of view of satisfaction or from other fear. Lots happening. I'm glad you came today. We didn't have a whole lot of rain to scare you away, but it's about the same group as before. So thank you for coming.
I have just one question. As I was coming here, I was hearing on the radio that Mr. Trump has a $300 million debt to Deutsche Bank, and they were making a big issue about it. Is that an issue worth following, or is it?
Well, I think you need to, on any of these things, regarding any of the candidates, if there is actually fire behind that smoke, we're going to hear about it, because with at least one house of the Congress and more than 10 candidates already declared for the presidency, there's a lot of incentives in our system, plus our free press. We'll hear more if there's more. Thank you all.
Thank you.